in this upcoming session, Humanity in Crisis, Navigating the Challenges of a Fractured World. We have none other than Safi Rauf. He's an Afghan-American humanitarian and a Navy reservist.
And he will share his insights on addressing pressing humanitarian challenges amidst global fractures. His experiences offer valuable perspectives on navigating crisis with compassion and resilience in our complex and fractured world. So, ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together for Safi. Safi, if we can have you on stage, please.
I would like to begin by thanking the Times Group of India and the ET Now Global Business Summit for giving me the tremendous opportunity to speak here today. I'm honored to be part of this landmark event, and I'm exceptionally grateful to all the organizers for the hard work. As a child growing up, an Afghan refugee, India was always a country that I looked up to. Maybe it was because of Shah Rukh Khan's movie or the sweet melodies of the Indian music I listened to, but as I got older, I came to understand India's place in the world in a broader context, to appreciate it as a global superpower and to recognize how it stands at the forefront of innovation and progress. And that is why it makes me particularly happy and humbled to be sharing my experiences today and to continue building a better world with all of you. Today's theme of disruption, development, and diversification are all exceptionally relevant to my work as a humanitarian in particular. So I want to start by discussing a fairly recent part of my journey. The day I was released from Taliban captivity after 105 days as a hostage in Kabul, Afghanistan. This is me. I'm in Doha, Qatar, being escorted off a Qatari C-17 by US State Department official J.P. Feldmayer. And this photo captured by my first few steps as a free man after a harrowing journey that included horrific conditions, torture, starvation, and beyond. While I was relieved to be free and returning to my family, I left that experience feeling more than anything invigorated by the lessons I'd learned in captivity and eager to put them to use out in the world. After all, if nothing else, captivity teaches you to cherish every day you walk the earth as a free man, and I wasn't about to waste a second of it. So today I'm delighted to share that thought process with you, and I'm going to tell you about the lessons I've learned through the adversity I've faced as a Taliban hostage, as a humanitarian leading an NGO, through seemingly impossible straits, and in my time in the US military. Ultimately, these lessons boil down to 5 key topics: resilience in the face of adversity, resilience in the face of adversity, negotiation mastery, ethical consideration in practice, global perspective for success, and business agility and innovation in crisis. This is me on my first day of training as a corpsman in the US Navy. On your first day of military training in the US Navy, your superior keeps you awake for 48 hours. This is the first test, and these tests get progressively hard, The tests are not designed to assess how strong you are, but rather how resilient. And this is distinction in what I want to discuss here. Strong people can break after failures, but resilient people persist in the face of adversity. And it was my military training in resilience that prepared me for the challenges I would face thereafter, most specifically while in captivity when I was first taken hostage by the Taliban. I had a bag thrown over my head. I was separated from my brother Anis, whom I had been in Kabul with, and I was thrown onto a dirt floor basement cell in the dead of winter with no heat, no blanket, no windows, and no communication with the outside world. Back home, I knew my family was waiting for my return from Kabul. What would they think had happened to me? I had no way to tell them I was alive. This moment in my life, put simply, rock bottom. And for the first 4 days of my captivity, I laid motionless on the prison cell floor, facing the thought that I had reached the ultimate failure of my humanitarian efforts. In my mind, there was nowhere to go from there, and in a matter of days or weeks, I would be dead. But then on the 4th day, something shifted and my resilience training kicked in. I started utilizing disruption by befriending guards, negotiating with my captors from within the prison, coordinating resistance with other prisoners, and going on hunger strikes to expedite my release. It would take 101 more days and the efforts of countless individuals outside of the prison as well as that will ultimately secure my release. But it was that decision to shift from a mode of failure to a mode of resilience and disruption that I believe saved my life. I have failed so many times in my life, but I don't view that as a bad thing. What I have learned is that we must fail often and fail forward because success is so rarely found on a linear pathway. Second, let's turn to negotiation mastery. This is my father, Abdul. He was born in Logar, Afghanistan 79 years ago, and it's his mastery of negotiation that I believe was the most crucial element leading to my release from Taliban captivity. On day 50 of my captivity, negotiations between the US government and my captors, the Taliban, had stalled to a point of impasse. It seemed as though there was nowhere to go. But then my brother Zabi and my father Abdul, who after immigrating to the United States 18 years ago live in Omaha, Nebraska, had an idea that my colleagues in the US government told them they were crazy for having. They had the idea to come to Afghanistan to negotiate my release in person themselves. And so against the advice of everyone else involved, they got on a plane and entered Afghanistan. My father then requested a meeting with Abdul Haq Wasiq, the General Directorate of Intelligence, and the meeting was granted. In the meeting, my father asserted his dominance as a Pashtun tribal elder and reminded Wasiq that he had known his father and that he believed his father would show mercy in this situation. He also invoked the teachings of Islam, knowing that Wasiq is a very religious man. Ultimately, this did the trick. Wasiq had previously refused to agree on terms for release with the US government, agreed to terms for release with my 70-year-old father. My father works at Tyson Food Plant in Omaha, Nebraska. And that's because my father understood something crucial about negotiation. First, he understood that dialogue is the most important aspect of every negotiation when you can bring your opponent to the table and look them straight in the eye versus communicating digitally or not speaking at all. Half the work is already done. Additionally, the efforts and meaning of my father flying halfway around the world, sit down and break bread with his son's captors meant something to Wasiq, and that was important. Second, my father understood that he had to hone in on what mattered the most to his opponent and to make the core of his negotiation. The US government was negotiating with the Taliban based on a certain set of assumptions about what they wanted, but my father understood that the man with the decision-making power, Wasiq, cared most about two things: Pashtun fidelity and religious principles. If my father could play to the two specific zones of interest, he was far more likely to get what he wanted than if played to unfounded assumptions about the interest of his opponent. Ultimately, after my family had negotiated the deal for my release with the Taliban, the US government learned from the success and emulated my father's methodology. The US government official I mentioned earlier, J.P. Feldmeyer, took those lessons and applied them to get our release across the finish line. In negotiating the specifics of my release, J.P. told me that his goal was to keep the line of communication open. If the Taliban demanded something that the US government was unwilling to provide, J.P. did not say no. He said, let's talk about it, and then tried to get to the bottom of what was motivating and driving his opponent in their requests so that he could find a middle ground that the US government could grant. If you can continue to talk, the door remains open, and that's what I believe is most important in the art of negotiation. Third, let's turn to ethical consideration in practice. This is a photo of my operations center in Washington, D.C. in August of 2021. Predating my captivity, this center is where my NGO Human First Coalition was born in the wake of the Taliban's takeover of Afghanistan. We sought to evacuate as many individuals in need as possible, but because there were no government-dictated rules for this evacuation decision-making, was challenging but ultimately ethically confounding. And this is where I'll get to what's most difficult part of my work. How to keep ethical consideration at the core of your practice while continuing to try to serve as many people as possible. When my team and I set out to evacuate vulnerable individuals from Afghanistan, in this tragic moment, we came to understand that the most vulnerable individuals were often Afghan nationals who were being targeted by the Taliban. But as Americans and veterans, we were faced with ethical dilemma. The US government requested us, and our military training suggested that the American citizens remaining in Afghanistan at this time should be our priority in an evacuation mission. Their status as American nationals not only gave them official priority in getting out of the country, but it gave them somewhere to go. In other words, their evacuation was easier. But what was heartbreaking was that those individuals, the American nationals, were often in less danger than their counterparts who were Afghan nationals. We received nonstop calls from the Afghan national describing horrific danger and begging for us to help. And we knew that oftentimes the American nationals could find other ways out of the country without any team's help. So at times, it seemed that the seats on the planes that we held for American nationals would be better put in use to the Afghan nationals. So I was left with the ethical conundrum of whether to follow my mandate or deviate and help those whom I felt were most in need. And through much brainstorming with my amazing team, a solution emerged that seemed to achieve the best of both worlds. Specifically, I negotiated with the US government officials who were in charge of approving flight manifests, telling them that I would evacuate American citizens, but that for every American that I put on a plane, there must be 3 at high-risk Afghans on the plane as well, who were granted some sort of status in the United States. And the government agreed, thereby allowing us to utilize the American nationals to buy the passage of the Afghan nationals. Ultimately, my team and I evacuated about 1,400 US nationals, but moreover, we also evacuated about 5,000 Afghan nationals, and that was only possible because we got into the weeds on where our ethical quandaries lay, and ultimately a solution emerged. Time and again, as a humanitarian, I've encountered similar dilemmas. There will always be more people to help than help that can be given. For every person that you help, there will be thousands asking you why there weren't help, and this is something I've experienced time and again. And if I'm honest, it makes the work feel endless and often exhausting and overwhelming at the point of defeat. But in those moments, I try to always go back to resilience, to remember that drops in a bucket are how a bucket gets filled, and to reaffirm the ethical principle behind why I do the work in the first place. It's that reminder that keeps me going. Fourth, let's turn to global perspective for business success. This is a photo of my colleagues and I campaigning and introducing the Afghan Adjustment Act, a critical piece of legislation for Afghan refugees in the United States Congress. As you can see, I'm the only person of color. Throughout my short life as an Afghan-American, I've found myself in rooms where I'm often the only non-white person. This brings its unique set of challenges, but what I've come to learn is that this is not a disadvantage, it's my superpower. In that, we cannot underestimate the power of cultural understanding, and specifically in negotiations and relations, be they business, political, or otherwise. When my captivity was nearing what would be its ultimate, a key disagreement arose between my family and the US government. Specifically, my father had made this aforementioned deal with the Taliban via Abdul Haq Wasiq to secure my release on a handshake between Pashtun elders. The US government felt the deal would only be real when the Taliban put it in writing and signed a document acknowledging the terms of the agreement, but my family knew better. They understood that cultural realities in Afghanistan and amongst Talibs dictate that piece of paper means nothing and a handshake means everything. Painstakingly, my family sought to convince the US government of this reality, and ultimately they succeeded. Sure enough, the Taliban lived up to their end of the bargain, secured over a simple handshake between 2 elders, because that is what cultural realities dictate holds the most weight. In looking to achieve success across international borders, understanding how cultural impacts pathways to success is one of the most, if not the most critical keys to success. It comes back to the key theme of diversification, that the more perspective we have access to, the more we will understand the challenges we face. Fifth, and finally, Let's turn to business agility and innovation in crisis. This is a photo of my guard in Taliban prison. Let's call him Ahmed. On the 17th day of my captivity, my desperate need to reach my family and inform them that I was alive reached to a boiling point, and I racked my brain for how to somehow get contact with the outside world from within a basement cell with no phone, no sunlight, and no way of communicating with anyone. It was then that I overheard my guard Ahmed having a conversation with another guard. In this conversation, he started speaking about how he had been betrothed to a young woman he was excited to marry, but that he didn't have enough money for the wedding. He was worried that his father would break off the betrothal and marry her to someone else who could afford the wedding. Suddenly, something clicked in my brain. Here was something that my captor wanted, and I needed to figure out how I could play a role in getting it for him so that I could get what I wanted. So at a moment of disruption, I spoke up and I made a proposal to Ahmed that surprised him. I explained that if he went to visit my cousin Jamal, who was living just a few blocks away, Jamal would give him money for his wedding in exchange for my use of his cell phone. If Ahmed told Jamal I had made this arrangement from within the prison, Jamal would be more than happy to oblige. And it worked. Ahmed visited Jamal. Jamal gave him money for his wedding, and subsequently Ahmed let me use his cell phone to call my loved ones from prison and let them know that I was alive, ultimately allowing to start strategizing on my release. Being nimble in crisis leads to innovation in problem solving, and moreover, humans are driven to action because they want or need something. And if we can find out what that something is, we can make enormous strides in getting what is that we want and need. While I would not relive my terrible experiences in Taliban captivity for anything, this experience and other adversities I have faced in my life have taught me these critical lessons that I will carry with me in all that I do from here. I hope that sharing them with you today has been valuable, and I look forward to the speakers to come in this tremendous and enriching moment. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Mr. Rauf, for sharing these experiences, heart-wrenching as it is.